I would like to go ahead and introduce today's presenter, Leanne Osganian. She has 25 years of account management and sales experience in the construction industry software sector. Prior to joining AvidXchange, her focus was enterprise resource planning software for the construction industry, including enterprise content management and automated workflow solutions. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to you, Leanne.
Great. Well, thank you, Sully. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. The focus of today's meeting is going to be around AvidXchange's suite for construction with your Acumatica system to automate your end-to-end accounts payable process. What we're going to be covering, I'm going to start with just a brief overview of AvidXchange, give you a little background on us as an organization, touch on our mission and value proposition, and then we'll dive into the invoice to pay workflow process, what that looks like. Then we'll focus on the product demonstration, and we'll wrap up with a summary of the benefits around automation. Our mission at AvidXchange is to transform the way companies are paying and receiving their bills by providing solutions to automate the invoice to pay process. That's what we do all day, every day. That's what our core competency is. We have over 20 years of experience. We're headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have over 2,000 employees and upwards of 10,000 customers that use our solutions as well as services to transform and digitize their AP processes. The Titanium system, it's designed for construction companies, and it tightly integrates with your Acumatica system. You'll be able to maintain control with a centralized platform and be able to analyze data with customizable dashboards and reporting. Maximize your workforce efficiency by automating the onboarding, the entry, and routing of invoices, and use tailored workflows to ensure invoices and payments are reviewed and approved by the right people at the right time. Pay your vendors quickly based on the status of your invoice, and also mitigate risk associated with processing paper checks. Recent surveys show that payment fraud is on the rise, with 76% of companies experiencing payment fraud within the last year, and the majority of that fraud was around paper checks. And Titanium, it's purpose-built for Acumatica construction, so data flows seamlessly between systems, giving you quick and easy access to information. AvidXchange has built an extensive payment network over a number of years, representing 8,800 buyers that have processed nearly 76 million vendor payment transactions in 2024 to over 1.4 million suppliers, totaling $68 billion in payment volume. So what that really means to you is, on average, about 40% of the companies that you're paying are already set up in our vendor network. If they're not in our vendor network, we have a team of nearly 500 people dedicated to supplier onboarding and support services. So they will reach out to your vendors to review the payment options that they have available to get them set up with their preferred payment method. And with our AvidPay Direct payment option, we will also get the bank account details from the supplier. We store the information securely and then also manage changes to that process. That way you're not responsible for sensitive bank information, just reducing your overall risk on your end. So this is an illustration of the complete invoice to pay process. So with our Titanium system, you can really think of it as the front end to your Acumatica system when it comes to onboarding invoices, entering them, routing them for approval. Once that invoice has been fully coded and approved, that's when it will get sent into Acumatica. Acumatica will be your system of record. New vendors, new jobs, new cost codes, all that will be entered, and maintained within the Acumatica platform. And then we have visibility to that information within Titanium via the automated API integration. So there's no importing or exporting that you need to do. Everything is, synchronized, like I said, automatically. Now, with the onboarding of invoices, we have a number of automation tools that we can use on the front end to really streamline that process. We can monitor an AP inbox. So if you do have a dedicated inbox set up for invoices, we can watch the inbox and we can either move them to a folder, or we can combine that with our auto acquire software to be able to bring those invoices into the system automatically and assign them to a data entry group. As those invoices are being acquired into Titanium, the OCR and smart extraction technology is going to pre-fill information on those invoices so somebody doesn't need to key all the information in. The system will route the invoices based on your workflow rules, all right? And that's very configurable. You can have workflows based on, job cost code combination, vendor GL account combinations. So there's a number of ways to route invoices. You can have multiple levels of invoice approval, and you can also have dollar threshold parameters built into your process as well. The system will send notifications to let your approvers know that they have invoices that need their attention. And the system will also send out reminders. That way, if something's been sitting for X number of days, the approver will get notified to let them know that they need to get those invoices approved. It is a cloud-based solution, so they can approve easily on a smartphone or a tablet, and also have visibility to the invoice image as they're doing that review and approval. And if you like, you can have what we call a final review step. In many cases, after the invoice has gone out to someone on the operations side, accounting may want to just have that final check before the invoice gets sent over to Acumatica. Now, when we send the invoice to Acumatica, we're sending all of the data that was entered and collected as part of this routing and approval to be able to create the invoice record within Acumatica, but we also provide the attachment. So the actual invoice image will get sent into Acumatica and be available. And that will include all of the approval history, any supporting documents that might have been attached. So if you attach maybe a purchase order or receiving document, that whole invoice packet, even including the proof of payment, will all be accessible within your Titanium system as well as within Acumatica. The next slide here, this focuses more on the payment process. Once those invoices are in Acumatica, you're going to manage the selection of the invoices that you want to pay, just like you do today. And then instead of printing out checks, you would have an option to print to Avid. That tells the system to move that payment data into TimberScan Titanium into what we call our pay control function. So that's where the payment approval process happens. You can also have multiple levels of approval. So if you want to have maybe just a rule that if it's over a certain dollar amount, it goes to a second level of approval. And then once the payments are approved, as long as we receive the approval before 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's when the money will get debited from your account or accounts, if you have multiple, into a money service businesses account. And then AvidXchange will pay your suppliers based on one of these 4 methods, either a virtual card, an AvidPay direct payment, or a check. These are options that the vendor would choose from. We recently introduced a new payment modality called a sponsored ACH payment. That gives you the ability to pay your vendor via an ACH without the vendor incurring a fee to receive that payment. For the check option, there's a couple of nice things to point out here as well. Because we're paying the vendors via the money service businesses account, any checks that AvidXchange sends out will go with positive pay, but our team will process the positive pay files and manage that. And then it's also then not your bank account information, that's on the checks that go out the door. So that's something a lot of companies really like these days, especially in light of the, check fraud that you hear about. It just really limits your risk and exposure. Once the payments go out the door, AvidXchange also provides ongoing payment aging services. So we will follow up on those payments. We will also field calls from your vendors. Your vendors can also choose to use our vendor portal. So that way, if they want to log into the portal to see the status of their payment, they can also set up preferences, notifications if they want to get notified of status changes, and things of the like. All right, so I'm going to shift gears and we're going to head into the product. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is TimberScan Titanium for Acumatica. On the home screen here, you can see we have a dashboard, and this is the workflow execution status view. It's showing me all invoices that are in the routing and approval. And then we break it down by different categories, by vendor, by project, cost code. So you can just hover over and see either total dollars for a particular category or the number of invoices for that category. You can also change the view dynamically if you just want to see maybe what's in an AP entry queue, or you could hone in on a particular user. Maybe you just want to get a quick view of what one of your approvers has in their queue. And then the general navigation will be over here on the left in the tree menu. Now, to get new invoices in the system, there's a number of ways to do that. If you leverage all the automation tools, again, we can set up the system where the invoices will come in. We'll pull them out of the email inbox and we can drop them right into the AP invoice entry queue. You always have the ability to bring them in this way. And when you bring them into the system manually, you pick a data entry group, you tell the system what you want to bring in. You'll notice here we also have an option for a document. So you can use Titanium as an electronic filing cabinet as well. It's not limited to just AP invoices. You can track and manage other documents within the platform as well. If I'm bringing in invoices, I'm going to select that, and you can drag and drop in here, simply just use the browse option. And this is if you just use the email monitoring and have the system put them into a folder. You can browse here and you can bring in everything, or you can pick and choose invoices. That will put them here into the acquire screen. So at the top, you have some control buttons if you want to make things bigger or smaller. In the center are options for annotations if you wanted to, maybe put a sticky note with some text. If you need to split anything out, you can simply right-click and say split here. So now I've just split that out into two separate invoices. Once you've made any adjustments here, when you hit the acquire button in the upper right-hand corner, that's when the system will take the batch of invoices that you're working with, and it's going to go ahead and move them to the data entry group that we had picked on the prior screen. Ultimately, those invoices will land here in the invoice entry queue. Now, here, this is where data entry would spend their time, and they can make these bigger or smaller, just depending on personal preference. And then if I select all, it gives me the ability to process invoices in what I call a batch mode. So it's not one at a time where you have to, click and open the image and then go to the next one. You can simply select everything and just go into the whole batch and go from, one to the other with the invoice image right there. You can always just click on a particular document and that'll bring you into that one record. Or you can select multiple. So if there's just a few here that I want to work with, you can just pick those and hit execute. And then that's going to bring me into just those particular records. In this example here, this is one that relates to, there's a purchase order on here. I also have the ability to tailor my entry screen. You can see here if there's multiple pages or supporting documents, they'll be in this panel here. That can be collapsed. You can also collapse the main menu. And then you decide, do you want your entry grid on the side? Do you prefer it on the bottom? And then you can adjust it. If you have dual screens in AP, you can break this out into a separate window, and that way have the full image of the invoice on one monitor and your entry grid on another. You can also control the columns you see in the fields. So, if there's certain things you don't use during invoice entry, they don't apply, you can just uncheck them and then you won't see them on the screen here. And you can also, reorder things. So if you just move the columns, you can drag and drop them to really just tailor, how you want the entry screen to look. So with a purchase order, you'll notice the fields that are colored here. That's the smart extraction technology working. So that will populate header information on the invoice. And then for the line items, when it relates to a PO, you have options where you can either have the system create the lines from the purchase order, specific PO lines, a subcontract, or receiving tickets. So when I select the receiving ticket here, I can see I have 2 for this particular purchase order. And then, based on the description here, I'm going to go ahead and select this receiving ticket. So when I do that, the system will automatically attach then the receiver from Acumatica and the corresponding purchase order. And then I can also see here when I scroll over, all of the coding comes in right from the receiving ticket. I'll have a summary at the top where it'll tell me what the purchase order was for, what's been received against it, what the current invoice amount is, what's been billed previously, and my balance. So I have all that, at my fingertips. What's coming in our next release is where we're going to read the line items on the invoice image, and we are going to flag for exception matching. So if the invoice is different than what's on the receiver or the price doesn't match, we're going to automatically call out those discrepancies. So that, again, is coming in our next release. From the entry screen, you can use the history button here. This just gives you a quick way on any field that you click on. When you hit history, it's just going to bring up those invoices for that particular element. So here it brought up all the invoices for that specific vendor. You can see the coding on those invoices. You can view the image, the workflow. So if you just wanted a quick way to see, what did I pay the last time, I worked with that vendor. You can put notes on here. You can do either annotations, or if you use the notes option, that will become part of your audit trail. If there's an issue and maybe you want to put the invoice on hold and come back to it later, you can do that here as well. Otherwise, once you've created your line items, everything looks okay. You have the option, if everything matches, if the invoice matches your PO and receiver, you can just have it go automatically into Acumatica. So you could have a custom rule here called PO match, and then that will tell the system this doesn't need to be routed for approval, and we'll just send it into Acumatica. Otherwise, you can have the system will just route based on whatever rule. So if you're routing by project, it would route it to, when I hit save and route, it'll go ahead and route the invoice to the project manager for that particular project. In this example, this is an invoice that doesn't relate to a purchase order. And again, you can see the smart extraction technology will populate header information. In the next release, we are going to bring in the line item detail as well. And here we have some nice tooltips available where, depending on what your workflow is, if the person entering the invoice does the actual coding, or if it's the approver that does the coding, they may just put in the project, and then the approver would be the one that assigns the proper task code and cost code. Right? If you have any defaults set up in Acumatica, those will automatically come in as well. I'm going to go ahead and log out and log in as another user. So we'll see what the approval side looks like. When I log in as an approver, this is going to be my dashboard. I'm only going to see the invoices that are routed to me. And again, I can look at the different categories, and I'll only see on my menu the functions that are available to me. So that's controlled via security. And then within my workflow task queue, This is where I'm going to manage and approve the invoices. And you can have other documents as well that have routing and approval rules. If you just look at, bills as an example, then you'll only see the invoices. And you can either look at them in the card view, very similar to what we saw on the invoice entry side. And then you can use the different filters if you want to look at something specific or a keyword search. Or you can use the grid view. So this gives you the ability to use the filters if maybe you want to look by a particular project. You can also control the columns here. So that way, if you wanted to, look by vendor or by due date, you can just drag that column up and it will automatically, group those invoices by that particular value. So that way you can just hone in on specific things. If you prefer to use the card view, then again, you can just go into the whole batch and start working the batch, or you can look at specific invoices. And as an approver, when I get the invoice, depending on the device I'm on, it's going to drive what this looks like. If I'm on a laptop, it's going to look, like this here, where I have my image over on the one side. If I'm on a tablet or a smartphone, it's going to look like this. All right, so if you think of this panel over here on the right as the face of your phone, where you'll have your header information, and then you can get into the, the detailed records, your line items. And you can go ahead and, pick whatever, corresponding task code or, cost code. And then you can also see with the tooltips, it will tell you what the budget was for that particular task or cost code, revised budget, what's been invoiced against it. Is there anything, going through the routing and approval process now and the balance? So that way, as an approver, you have that information easily accessible to be able to make, decisions on getting these invoices approved quickly. So once you've done the coding, you're either going to approve it or you can reject it as well. If you reject the invoice, you do have to put a reason why. And then you have the ability to select who you're going to reject that invoice to. So depending on how many people you have in your workflow, you'll see a list of them here. And, if you want to send it all the way back to data entry, you could. But if you're, the fourth person in your approval, maybe you only want to send that back to the person, prior to you in the approval process. So you can control how far it goes back. It doesn't have to start from the beginning. And then the person the invoice gets rejected to will also receive a notification that they have a rejected invoice that needs attention. If this was related to a commitment or a PO or a subcontract, they will have the same tooltips that we saw on the data entry side, where they'll be able to see what the amount of the commitment is, what's been invoiced against it, what's remaining. So I'm going to log back in, and we tried to keep the approval aspect really easy for the end users. From a reporting standpoint, we have a number of nice inquiries available in the system as well. We have an invoice inquiry, an invoice status inquiry. The invoice inquiry is going to just show, it's going to show invoices that are still going through the routing and approval, as well as invoices that have already been approved and are in Acumatica. So when I scroll over here, the ones that say Acumatica, that means the invoice has already been approved through Titanium and is in Acumatica, whereas this one here is still going through the workflow process. The invoice status inquiry is only looking at invoices that are going through the routing and approval. We also have the workflow execution. This is more of a management inquiry where you can quickly look at invoices assigned to a particular user, and you can use the filters. You can also pick multiple users from the list, and then days in the queue, and you can do like a range. You can see with the inquiry, you can see the coding for that invoice. You can look at the image. You can do editing. You can also see if there was a workflow associated with the statuses, who it's assigned to. Now, with the invoice inquiry, for those companies that need to pull together backup for billing purposes, the inquiries are a really quick and easy way to get at that information. I can control the columns that I see here. So if there's certain things I don't want in my inquiry or that aren't relevant here, I can uncheck them. So again, I can kind of tailor what's on my screen. And then I can also, if I need to run this for a particular project, I can select a project. And you can even select, task codes, a date range. That way, if, like I said, I'm doing my, billing at the end of the month and I need to pull together a billing report here, I can easily get to the information. When I select the report option, if I want to apply grouping, I can use any of these values. Maybe I want to group it by task code. If I select the PDF option, it gives me the ability to then create the report with the images combined. If you push the information to Excel, it does format, clean to Excel, but you just don't get the images. And then you can decide what you want included in that packet. In addition to the invoice image, if you want the supporting documents, the approval page, the system is building an approval page as you go through the routing and approval, so it'll have all the steps of the workflow. And then you can also have the proof of payment included in the packet that you're creating. And then if you want to, give it a title, and, your subtitle might, be the name of the project. And so the system will then go out, it's going to grab all of the data for the date range that you selected, as well as all of the invoice images. And in this case, it was also grouping them. You'll see the title at the top of the report, so you can customize that. Your company will be, on the upper left-hand corner here. And then, in this case, we grouped it by cost code. So it took all of those invoices, grouped them by cost code. I get a subtotal by cost code, and then I have my total. And then behind that will be all of the, invoices or other documents, depending on what you said you wanted included in your packet. So this can be a really big, time saver, especially for companies that do a lot of T&M or cost plus work, having to pull that information together. Now, on the payment side, let me just show you here, actually, before I shift to the payments. Over here in Acumatica, I mentioned you can see the invoice image. When you click on the file link, you're going to see the invoice image as well as anything attached. This is the approval page that I mentioned. The system is keeping track of when that invoice was received, by whom, by when, who entered it and when it was approved. You'll see a card for each level of approval. And that automatically, like I said, gets attached. If you use the payment network, the proof of payment will automatically get attached to the invoice as well. And so that way you'll be able to view that within Acumatica as well as within Titanium. With the payment approval process, the payments you initiate within Acumatica, instead of printing out checks, you're going to tell the system you want to print to Avid. That's going to send the payments into this pay control here in the approval queue. Anyone at your organization that has authority to approve payments, they would see the pay control option on their menu. So when I go in here, you can use any of the different filters you see. If you hit search, it'll show you everything. Each line item is a payment, that needs to be reviewed and approved. You can select multiple if you wanted to approve them in mass. Some companies like to look at the invoice image as part of the approval process. Others don't necessarily care. So it's really, the information is all there. So if you do want to look at that as part of your approval process, Super easy to get to it. You'll see the invoice image, anything that was attached to it, the approval history. Over here on the right, you have payment information. This is where you would see if you had multiple invoices, they would be here in this grid. And then up at the top, if you want to go ahead and approve the payment, you just hit the green check mark, and that will release the payment to the payment network. Right? So it's at that point that the funds get moved from your account to the money service business's account, really when the payment process starts. Once the payment is released, you have the payment inquiry available. And again, you have payment-related fields, invoice fields for searching. You'll see everything, payment and invoice related in this one query. You can control the columns that you see here. You can do filtering. Over here on the right, I can see the payment method. Right? So Acumatica will think a check was printed regardless of the payment method your vendor chooses. And they can choose from the virtual card, AvidPay Direct, or the check. And then you have the option, if that vendor is not already signed up for an electronic payment in the network, the virtual card or AvidPay Direct, you can choose to pay that supplier via the sponsored ACH option. You'll see the status here. And then from the same view, you can look at the proof of payment by simply clicking on the $sign. Right? In this case, this was a virtual card payment, so I can see when that was processed and approved. Even if it's a check that we produce on your behalf, that clear check image will automatically get attached as well. You can see the invoices from the same inquiry. You can look at the invoice image as well. And then below here, you have the payment approval process. You have all the history and the steps, logged for the payment approval. So just a real quick, easy way to get at everything, payment related. And by having the proof of payment attached to the invoice, it can also cut down on inquiries to your accounting team. So if your project managers, might get, an inquiry from a subcontractor or vendor, on payment status, and they can just open the invoice and easily see, the proof of payment. All right, I'm going to shift back here, and we're just going to do a quick wrap up, touching on the summary of benefits, quick review of what we covered in the presentation, and just touch on some of the reasons why, companies are automating their invoice to pay process with Titanium and AvidPay. So you'll be able to reduce your costs, both direct and indirect, by having that end-to-end automated and paperless accounts payable process. You'll increase your efficiency and be able to scale by eliminating the paper, the manual tasks and errors. That's going to enable your process to be able to pay invoices faster, be able to grow the business without having to scale your costs. You'll maintain control by managing and approving your invoices and payments all in one platform based on your business rules, and be able to analyze the data with customizable reporting and dashboards, plus have more timely access to job cost reporting. Reduce your risk by paying your vendors quickly and securely. Providing more e-payment options enables you to mitigate that risk associated with check fraud, and it provides your suppliers with more payment options to be able to increase their and support their cash flow needs. And the digital transformation. Easily embrace the digital transformation. Paper checks are being phased out. The number of checks produced worldwide has actually been cut in half in the last 5 years. And earned rebates. So you'll earn rebates on each qualifying transaction processed through the AvidPay network. And those rebates can, offset as well as even exceed the cost of using AvidPay. All right, and so I just want to mention we can also do a what we call a vendor match to compare your vendors against our vendor network. And it'll tell us how many of your vendors are accepting electronic payments. And that will give us the ability to tell you what your rebates would look like And we can even provide a minimum guaranteed rebate to really drive that predictable return on investment.